Hey class, welcome to Zurich, Switzerland. This is the church where Ulrich Zwingli preached at for many years. I was looking around for the pipe organ and turns out there isn't one. Do you know why? Zwingli believed that God didn't like music and that musical instruments ought to be done away with. So Zwingli had this church's organ torn out, destroyed. It said that the organist, who was apparently quite good, sat on the steps of this very church and wept. Many things happened during the Protestant Reformation that were violent and destructive. The tearing out of a great organ in a church like this is not the most devastating, though for someone like myself who loves historic church music, it's particularly sad. We're going to watch today a little bit about Ulrich Zwingli, talk a little bit about where he and Luther differed. Let's just put it very directly, the Mass. Yeah, I mean, just look at the altar behind me. Oh, wait, there isn't really one. What's there is little, and it's called a table. But hey, one thing that Zwingli's all about, preaching. The pulpit's still there. Thanks, Zwingli. You know I love long sermons. We'll also be learning about the impact that Zwingli has on Protestantism from here on out, and a little bit about one of my favorite groups of people called the Anabaptists. They're here, and then they're not.
The Reformation in 16th century Europe moved forward on many fronts. Sometimes it moved forward in secret to avoid detection. Other times it moved forward in great cathedrals with dynamic preachers. It also advanced in quiet scholarship and the rediscovery of the Bible. It advanced among both peasants and privileged. It sometimes advanced in fierce theological debate and other times in violent combat. Zwingli was a mountain man, born on New Year's Day in 1484, just a few years before Columbus discovered the New World. Zwingli's family lived in the village of Wildhaus, about 40 miles outside of Zurich. This is his childhood home. His father was a mountain farmer and bailiff. Zwingli had 7 brothers and 6 sisters. Young Ulrich was a gifted musician, able to play 6 instruments. He would go from here to be educated at Basel, Vienna, and Bern. And then in 1506, at age 22, he was ordained in the Catholic Church and appointed parish priest in the Swiss community of Glarus. So he became priest at Einsiedeln, a busy Swiss pilgrimage center with a popular shrine to the Virgin Mary. Here he began to have growing doubts about Catholic practices. And here he experienced another personal turning point. Zwingli met the great humanist scholar Erasmus, who came out with his Greek New Testament in 1516. Zwingli bought it and devoured it. He taught himself Greek. "Nothing but God shall prevent me from acquiring Greek," he said, "not for the sake of fame, but for the sake of the Holy Scriptures." He copied Paul's epistles in Greek and carried them with him wherever he went and even memorized them. Here's a sample page where you see Zwingli's extensive notes in the margins. This intensive study of the Bible made him question Catholic doctrine even more. Zwingli knew about Luther and the ferment he was causing in Germany, and now, independently, Zwingli was coming to many similar conclusions. On New Year's Day, 1519, his 35th birthday, Zwingli became people's priest at the Grossmünster, or the Great Cathedral, in Zurich. He was now a man obsessed with the Bible. So instead of following the prescribed texts of the lectionary, he took the Gospel of Matthew and started preaching straight through the book.
And there goes the idea of having the entire church literally on the same page every Sunday as we walk through the life of Christ every year.
That was a bold move in that day. First year at Zurich, the city was struck by the dreaded plague. Zwingli was away recovering from illness. Against advice, he rushed back to attend to his people.
You must help me.
He contracted the plague and suffered 3 agonizing months. 1/3 of Zurich's 9,000 citizens died during that plague. It marked still another turning point for Zwingli. Now, in a deeper way, he knew of God's grace and the meaning of pastoral compassion. At the same time, his questioning of Rome continued. Zwingli had received a yearly payment from the Pope. He now refused that income. In his sermons, Zwingli directly challenged Catholic teachings he could not find in the Bible, such as indulgences, purgatory, the position of Mary, and the sacrifice of the Mass. He held the people of Zurich spellbound. One listener said, he felt as if lifted up by the hair and suspended in space. A curious episode proved pivotal. At Froschauer's print shop, the men worked late one evening preparing for the Frankfurt Book Fair. They were hungry and ate sausages during Lent, thereby breaking Lenten fasting rules. As one historian described it, that was like desecrating the flag would be for us today. Zwingli, instead of condemning this action, wrote a pamphlet supporting it. His gap with Rome was widening. Then Zwingli married. He had petitioned his bishop for permission. It was refused, so he married anyway, a widow, Anna Reinhardt.
Wow, she seems like a barrel of laughs.
She brought 3 children to their marriage. They would also have 4 more of their own.
7 kids. That seems like a lot of work. No wonder they're kind of down in the face.
Zwingli continued his studies and circulated his Reformation views. But this was not an age of religious pluralism. There was one church. Zwingli, like Luther in Germany, was going against centuries of tradition. His teachings could only provoke intense controversy. The Zurich City Council convened a public disputation on January 29, 1523, to debate his views. Representatives came from the Bishop of Constance and the surrounding region. Zwingli presented 67 Reformation articles. The council backed Zwingli and decreed that he and other pastors in the region were to preach nothing but what can be proved by the Holy Gospel and the pure Holy Scriptures. As a result, drastic changes were implemented in Zurich. The Mass was rejected. Instead of familiar golden chalices, simple and unadorned wooden cups and plates were now used for communion. Instead of a sacrifice in which the bread and wine were transubstantiated into the body and blood of Christ, as the Roman Church taught, the Church at Zurich now believed Christ was spiritually, not physically present to believers who approached him in true faith. Zurich rejected monastic vows and the government took over the monasteries. Their goods were used to take care of the needy, their buildings changed into schools and hospitals. There was a daily distribution of food to those in need. The sick, widows, and orphans were provided public support. The reformers insisted that with a change of beliefs there also had to come a change in behavior, not only personal but social as well. There were to be no beggars in Zurich. Those who needed work were provided jobs. In a cleansing of the temple, visible reminders of Catholic worship were taken down. Zwingli and the council were not directly involved at first, but later approved the removal of Catholic elements not found in the Bible.
What do Protestants have against art? There is something holy about blank white walls.
A major crisis for Zwingli developed from among his most gifted students. They rejected infant baptism as unbiblical and rebaptized themselves as adults. For this, they were called Anabaptists.
All right, guys, let's talk here really quickly about the Anabaptists. They believed that one was to delay baptism until the candidate could confess their faith. This would be what we would call today adult baptism. They considered infant baptisms to be invalid. And while there are many today that continue this thought process, the vast majority of those who think like this, that infant baptism does not count, it's not valid, they do not actually grow out of the Anabaptist movement because, as we'll see, the Anabaptists are largely killed off. But they believe that it was a sign of obedience. Jesus said, go get baptized, so you're supposed to do it. And there's some other things that they believed in as well. They believed in freedom of religion, that is, that there shouldn't be a state-sponsored church. And of course, today in America especially, that's largely what we do believe. They believed in pacifism. They were complete pacifists. They believed that all violence was an abomination. They believed that there's no such thing as a just war. And so there are some people like the Quakers today, and even some that come out of the Mennonites traditions, and even the Amish tradition that can trace some of their thought processes back to the Anabaptists. They believed that they had to be completely separate from the rest of the world. And this is why, once again, if you look at Mennonites to some extent, but especially the Amish, that do grow out of the Anabaptist tradition to some extent, that's why they very much separate from the rest of the world. They believe that through a synergistic relationship with Jesus, that one could emerge as a perfect human being. They believe that baptism and church membership should be something that's voluntary. It's not something that would be expected of you. It would be a choice that you would make. Now, keep in mind that the theology of making choices has not really been discussed yet. And we'll talk about what that looks like later so you don't fall into Pelagian heresy. They had something of an evangelistic zeal, and this is because they believed, like Luther, in the priesthood of all believers, but they understood it very, very differently. They believed, in essence, anyone in any station could serve in the pastoral role. In fact, the pastoral role itself will change quite a bit under the Anabaptists. Obviously, things like communion and baptism loses its sacramental quality in the Anabaptist tradition. But as we can see, the Anabaptists, while they are important in understanding the 1500s and the Protestant Reformation in Europe, in the long run, there's not a large impact in terms of denominations emerging from them. Of course, with the Amish and the Mennonites in there to some extent, and some of the thought processes with the Quakers. And then, of course, there is some agreement on what it means to be baptized with the Baptist movement, which will be significantly later. That said, the Baptist movement, really in America, led by Roger Williams, seems to come to these conclusions completely apart from the Anabaptist tradition.
The city council held public debate and rejected their Anabaptist views. These Anabaptists would neither submit nor leave. So on January 5th, 1527, the city council drowned Anabaptist leader Felix Manz. Against the waters of baptism he sinned, they said, so by water shall he die. Felix was only the first of this new movement to be killed for their then radical beliefs.
Hey, don't just hold it against the Zwinglians, okay? Nobody liked the Anabaptists. The Catholics didn't like the Anabaptists. The Lutherans didn't like the Anabaptists. The Anglicans didn't like the Anabaptists. The Calvinists didn't like the Anabaptists. Pretty sure that was predestined. You know, it's kind of like, now you see them, now you don't sort of a situation.
It's now October 1529. Zwingli rides to a meeting of vast strategic importance in Germany. The Reformation was spreading in Europe. There was a threat that could no longer be ignored by Rome. Could the Zwingli Protestants in Switzerland and the Luther Protestants in Germany establish a united front against the gathering Catholic resistance? Philip of Hesse convened the Marburg colloquy at his castle and brought Luther and Zwingli to meet face to face. They took up 15 issues. Amazingly, they agreed on 14. They disagreed on the Eucharist and how Christ's presence was to be understood.
It's pretty interesting with Luther and Zwingli about the Lord's Supper. It's said that they were sitting down at their meeting, drinking beer and arguing theology, like German Swiss theologians might very well do. And they were arguing about whether Christ was truly, objectively present in the Eucharist. Luther famously, of course, dips his hand in the froth and writes, is equals is on the table. This is my body, Jesus says. This is my blood. Maybe not the best argument. Zwingli, however, says this, that when Jesus took the bread and broke it and gave thanks and said, "Take, eat," he said, "Take, eat," and then he pointed at himself. "This is my body." Apparently the disciples were confused, right? Wait, where's Jesus's body? Oh, good. We sorted that out. There it is. Okay, well, I guess there you go. If Jesus wasn't talking about the bread and he was talking about his actual body, thanks for pointing, Jesus.
Thus, the Lord's Supper, given by Jesus to unite his followers, became the issue over which these two separated.
All right, guys, so there you have it. Luther and Zwingli, as well as the Anabaptists. What do you need to know about Zwingli? You need to know that Zwingli and Luther disagreed on the Lord's Supper. You need to know that Zwingli is significantly less liturgical than Luther. That is, he places a lot less emphasis on tradition, on uniformity in church practice than Luther did. And finally, you need to know that Zwingli has a large impact in Switzerland, but it doesn't generally extend strongly beyond Switzerland itself. Today, there are still many Zwinglian churches in Switzerland. The larger influence here will be with Luther as his theology spreads northward to the Scandinavian countries, and also with John Calvin. John Calvin will, of course, also land in Switzerland, though he's French, and his ideas will become far more dominant. They will take predominance in various places in Europe, little pockets of Calvinism in France, some in Switzerland, definitely, and also in England. And some of those English Calvinists are going to make their way ultimately to America. So we'll be looking at that next. And if there's one last thing I want you to enjoy, it's this clip from the video that we've been watching.
Church